Daryl was 13 when he learned that some moments never leave you. It was late, past midnight on a Tuesday. He was supposed to be asleep, but he'd heard his father come home angry, his mother's voice rising in response. They were fighting about money, about choices, about something their son wasn't old enough to understand. Daryl got up to get water, the way kids do when the adults in their lives are fighting, and water seems like a reasonable excuse to leave their room. He stood at the apartment window in the dark, looking down at the street below. The neighborhood they lived in then, before the east side, before the tide, was the kind of place where midnight arguments happened on fire escapes and storefronts got tagged faster than they could be painted over. Then he saw the car pull up across the street. His father appeared at the building entrance, moving quickly, almost urgently. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, and as Daryl watched from his window, two other men emerged from the car, men he'd never seen before. They didn't approach his father threateningly. They simply existed beside him, like they'd been waiting for him. His father turned to face them. Daryl saw his face, confused, then afraid. The second man had a gun. Daryl watched the moment it happened, the small spark from the muzzle, his father going down like someone had cut his strings, the way the streetlight flickered above him, casting the scene in stutters of light and darkness. Daryl didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just watched. And in that moment, in the space between the moment the gun fired and the moment his father hit the ground, something shifted in Daryl's chest. It wasn't understanding. Understanding would come later. Right now it was just clarity. The world was not what he thought it was. The world was breakable. His father was breakable. His mother was breakable. And the people who broke things didn't ask permission. By the time Daryl's mother got to the window, his father was already gone. The funeral was 4 days later. His mother moved through it like someone underwater, present, functional, but not really there. His father's friends came, men with hard faces and expensive watches who patted Daryl's shoulder and said things like, "He was a good man, and we're going to take care of things." Daryl learned later that what they meant was they were going to find the man who'd done it and probably kill him. What they also meant, though nobody said this directly, was that his father's death meant something. His father had been involved in something, and that something had consequences. The police came by the apartment. They asked his mother questions. She answered them in a voice that sounded like it was coming from very far away. Then 2 weeks after the funeral, his mother sat Daryl down and said, "We're leaving." "Leaving where?" "The city, or not the city, but we're leaving this neighborhood." She didn't look at him when she said it. "The people who killed your father, they're still here. And if we stay, it's going to keep being about that. About revenge. About us being targets. We're going to the east side, to your aunt's place. We're going to start over." Daryl wanted to ask if that was possible, if you could really start over after seeing what he'd seen, but he didn't. He just packed his things into 2 duffel bags and followed his mother out of the apartment. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. The east side was worse. Daryl didn't know it could be worse, but it was. The neighborhood they'd left had been struggling, but it had rules. Here the rules were newer, meaner, more fluid. The tide ran most of this territory, but there were gaps, places where other crews came through, places where alliances shifted week to week. His aunt's place was a 2-bedroom walk-up with bars on the windows and a lock on the bathroom door, because you had to lock everything, even when nobody was home. Daryl and his mother shared one room. His aunt and his younger cousin took the other. On his first day of school, a kid approached him at the lunch table. "You from uptown?" the kid asked, not in a friendly way. "Just moved," Daryl said. "Yeah, I can tell." The kid's name was Marcus, no relation to the Marcus he'd meet later in the basement. And he looked at Daryl the way you looked at something that had just wandered into the wrong territory. This is tide territory now. You need to understand that. Everything here belongs to the tide. You walk the wrong block, talk to the wrong people, wear the wrong colors, they notice. And when they notice, things get complicated. Daryl nodded. He understood. He just watched his father die, so the concept of territory and consequence wasn't exactly new to him. But what he didn't know yet was how deep it went. How all of this, the neighborhoods, the territories, the crews, was going to wrap around his life like a chain. Scene 4, First days. A week into his time on the east side, Daryl was jumped. Nothing serious. Three kids trying to establish that the new kid from uptown wasn't going to be a problem. They were testing him, the way animals test each other. Is this one a threat? Is he going to fight back? Daryl did what his father had taught him before he died. Not the dying part, but the living part. He didn't throw the first punch. He didn't fight hard enough to create an enemy, but he didn't go down easy either. He landed hits. He got in a few good ones. And when they stopped, it wasn't because they'd beaten him. It was because something in the way he was fighting had made them understand that he would keep fighting until they stopped hitting him. That changed things. Not instantly, not dramatically. But over the next few weeks, the kids who jumped him started nodding at him in the hallway. The kids who'd been trying to figure him out started asking him to play basketball after school. There wasn't respect yet, but there was a beginning of it. Daryl was careful about the friends he made. He was careful about which blocks he walked down and which ones he avoided. He was learning the map of the neighborhood the way you learn a living thing. Not from looking at it, but from existing in it day after day, noting the patterns, the rhythms, the dangerous places and the safe ones. He learned that the tide operated out of a place called Malik's, a barber shop that was the front for something larger, though Daryl didn't know yet. He learned that the guy who ran Malik's was a man named Malik, who had a scar down the left side of his face and eyes that missed nothing. He learned that Malik was connected to Bishop, and Bishop was the real power, but respect came with risk. 2 weeks later, a different crew, not just kids testing him, but actual soldiers from a rival operation that ran the southern edge of the block, decided the new uptown kid was encroaching on their territory. Daryl didn't even know he was encroaching. He was walking from his aunt's place to the corner store on a Tuesday afternoon, minding his own business, when they grabbed him in an alley. There were 4 of them, older, scarred. This wasn't a test. This was a message. The first one to hit him did it with purpose. Not the clumsy teenage violence of kids his age, but the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Daryl felt his ribs light up with pain. He tasted blood. He tried to run. One of them cut him off. Another came around from behind. This was different from the kids at school, different from any fight he'd been in before. This was the kind of violence that had a point. The point was, you're not welcome here. The point was, we could kill you right now. Daryl didn't have a strategy for this. He just fought. And when one of the older guys pulled a knife, not to kill him, but to scare him, something in Daryl's chest flipped into a kind of survival clarity. He stopped thinking. He just acted. He threw the guy with the knife off balance, grabbed a bottle from behind a trash can. The fight went from control to chaos in 3 seconds. Then a car pulled up. Lights, people shouting. The older guys scattered. Daryl stayed in the alley, bleeding, shaking. A man got out of the car. It was Malik. "You hurt?" Malik asked. Not like he cared, just like he was assessing damage. "I'm okay," Daryl said, though his ribs screamed otherwise. Those were Crimson Blood's territorial markers. Malik looked at him like he was a piece of real estate being appraised. "You fought like you meant it. Most kids, they would have begged." "I didn't know what else to do." "Exactly." Malik handed him a handkerchief for the blood on his mouth. "That instinct, that's what matters. You ready to have a real conversation about that job I mentioned?" Daryl nodded. He was. Fear had its own clarity. Scene 5. First encounter. Daryl's mind flashed back to the first encounter with the Crimson Bloods and when he met Malik. The meeting happened by accident. Daryl was cutting through an alley that he'd been told to avoid. Not told explicitly, but the kind of avoidance you pick up from watching where people do and don't go. He was taking the shortcut because he was late getting home, and his mother had told him to be home by 5, and it was already 5:15. A man was standing in the alley. He had a scar down his face. Malik. Daryl's first instinct was to run. Everything in the neighborhood's language, the code written in tattoos and territory markers, and the way people move through space, said that you didn't end up alone with someone like Malik unless something was about to happen to you. But Malik just looked at him. He didn't move. He didn't threaten. But then Malik smiled, not a kind smile, a smile that said he knew something Daryl didn't. You had a rough afternoon, Malik said. It wasn't a question. Those Crimson Blood boys usually kill people who cross them. You're lucky. Daryl didn't feel lucky. His ribs still burned. They won't stop, Malik continued. See, they need to make a point about territory, and you're the perfect point to make, unless someone makes a point right back. Malik lit a cigarette. The smoke curled between them like a threat. That someone could be me, or you could be on your own. Your choice. What do you want? Daryl asked. I want to know if you're smart enough to understand that survival in this neighborhood means choosing a side. And if you choose the right side, that side protects you. You're the new kid, Malik said, not a question. Yeah. From uptown, your daddy was the guy who got killed. Daryl didn't respond. The fact that Malik knew this meant it was known. Meant his father's death meant something in these networks, carried a weight that Daryl was still figuring out. You're being careful, Malik continued. I've watched you. You don't walk the wrong blocks. You don't talk too much. You don't pick fights you can't win. You think. That's rare. Malik stepped closer. Not threateningly, but there was weight to it. Most kids your age, they just want to prove themselves. You want to survive. There's a difference. Okay, Daryl said. If you're looking for work, real work, money work, there might be something. Nothing heavy, but we're always looking for kids smart enough to listen more than they talk. Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper with a number on it. You think about it. You want to make some money, keep your eyes open, you call that number. He handed it to Daryl and then walked away, disappearing back into the spaces of the neighborhood like he'd never been there. Daryl stood in the alley holding the piece of paper. He didn't call the number, not then, but he kept it. And 3 months later, when his mother's medicine got expensive and they didn't have enough money for rent, he did. Scene 6. The Line. Daryl's first job for the Tide was running messages. Simple stuff. Envelope from point A to point B. Don't look inside. Don't slow down. Don't talk to anyone about what you saw. He was 14. He didn't ask questions. The money was real, and his mother didn't have to work 3 jobs anymore, and that was enough. The real test came 3 weeks in. A kid named Jerome. No, not Jerome. Different kid, similar story, was also running messages. He was younger than Daryl, maybe 12, and he was good at it. Fast, careful, reliable. One day he came to Daryl and said, "They want me to steal from another crew. They said if I don't, they're going to hurt my sister." Daryl understood the math. The Tide was testing Jerome, seeing if he could be pushed into violence, if he could be relied on to do the things that needed doing. But Daryl also understood something else. The Tide didn't actually need Jerome to steal from another crew. This was about breaking the kid, making sure he understood that once you were in, you did what you were told, even if it meant hurting people, even if it meant consequences. "Don't do it," Daryl told him. But they said, "Don't do it. Go to Malik. Tell him what they said about your sister. Tell him you came to me first." Daryl looked at the kid, and Malik will handle it. Jerome went to Malik. Malik handled it. The person who tried to force Jerome into theft got demoted, moved to a different territory, and Jerome kept running messages, but nobody tried to break him again. That moment mattered. Daryl didn't know it then, but he'd drawn a line. Survival, yes. Work, yes. But not this. Not breaking kids. Not threats against family. It was the first principle. There would be others. Scene 7. Connection with 7. 7 showed up at the basketball court on a Saturday in late summer, almost a year after Daryl's father died. Daryl hadn't seen him in so long, not since they'd moved, that for a moment he didn't recognize him. 7 was taller, his face had changed, but something in the way he moved was still familiar. "Yo, Daryl." They fell into a hug. Nothing was said for a long time, just the two of them, existing together in a way that cut through all the complication that had happened in the year they'd been apart. When they finally talked, sitting on the bleachers with sweat cooling on their skin, 7 said, "You're different." "Yeah. Bad different or just different." Daryl thought about it. He thought about his father's death. He thought about the piece of paper with Malik's number. He thought about Jerome, and the line he'd drawn. "Just different," he said finally. "I'm figuring things out." "I'm here if you need to talk about it," Seven said. And Daryl almost did. He almost told Seven everything. But he looked at his cousin, and he saw something in him that reminded him of who he'd been before his father died. Innocent, still believing the world made sense, and something in Daryl refused to break that. "I know," Daryl said. "I'm good, I'm working, making money, taking care of my mom." "She doing okay?" Seven asked. "Getting there." They played basketball after that, not saying much, just being together. It was enough. When Seven left, Daryl stayed on the court a little longer, shooting baskets by himself. He thought about the life that was opening up in front of him. He thought about the choice to say no to violence, to stay human, to protect the people he loved. He didn't know yet that this was just the beginning, that he would face harder tests, that his line would be tested again and again, and one day keeping it would cost him everything. But that day on the basketball court, with the sun going down and Seven heading home to Uptown, Daryl understood one thing clearly. He was going to have to be careful. He was going to have to make choices, and the choices he made now, the lines he drew now, were going to matter. ACT 2, The Rise, ages 16 to 18. Scene 1, The Invitation. By 16, Daryl had become someone worth knowing. It wasn't that he'd sought it out. It was that the Tide had a need, and Daryl had a skill. He could talk to people, not manipulation, not smooth talking, just the ability to listen and find the thing that mattered, then build something on that. He ran errands first, then deliveries. Then at 17, something shifted. Bishop, the Tide's operational leader, pulled him aside. "You got a head on your shoulders," Bishop said, casual over a bottle of Hennessy they weren't supposed to be drinking. "Most kids your age, they just want muscle. You think. That's rare." Daryl didn't respond right away. This was how you operated in this space. You learned when to speak and when to listen. "I'm moving you up," Bishop continued. "You're going to start negotiating territorial boundaries with the Blue Runners. They're getting aggressive, and I want someone smart at the table, not just someone with a gun. Think you can do that?" Daryl thought about his mother. He thought about Seven, whom he hadn't seen much since they'd moved. He thought about what it meant to say yes to something like this. Then he thought about survival. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." Scene 2, the first real win. The negotiations were held in a basement on neutral territory, an old auto shop that had closed down years ago. Daryl sat across from Marcus, the Blue Runner's second in command, a man in his late 20s with battle scars and intelligent eyes. "Bishop wants what?" Marcus asked. "A clean border, no expansion past 43rd Street. In return, Tide backs off recruitment in Blue Runner's territory." Marcus laughed. "That's not what Bishop wants. That's what you want. Tell me what Bishop really wants." Daryl felt something click. That same clarity he'd felt that night watching his father die. "Territory is just the surface," Daryl said quietly. "What Bishop really wants is to know the Blue Runners won't push into Tide supply lines. And what you want is reassurance that expansion isn't coming. So what if the line stays at 43rd, but we set up a joint operation between 42nd and 43rd? Neutral zone. Both crews benefit. Neither feels threatened." But before they could shake on it, everything went wrong. The basement door crashed open. 3 men in Red Runner colors, a crew that wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this meeting, poured in with guns drawn. "Nobody move!" the first one shouted. Daryl's mind raced. This wasn't about the negotiation. This was about the negotiation failing. Someone had tipped off a third crew to disrupt the peace, to reignite the war. Marcus was already moving. He had a gun, he'd drawn it in one smooth motion, but there were 3 of them, and Marcus was just one man. Then Daryl understood. They were positioned to kill Marcus, to decapitate the Blue Runners' leadership, and Daryl, as the Tide representative, was probably next. He didn't think. He just moved, grabbed the metal chair he'd been sitting in, and hurled it at the nearest gunman. The guy stumbled. In that moment of distraction, Marcus fired. The basement became chaos. Gunfire echoing off concrete, people shouting, the smell of cordite filling the air. Daryl dove behind a stack of old machinery. his heart hammering so hard he thought it would burst through his ribs. One of the gunmen went down, hit by Marcus. The second one fired back, and Daryl heard Marcus grunt, hit but still fighting. The third gunman turned toward Daryl's position. Then more gunfire from behind, from the door. More blue runners responding to the shots. The red runner gunmen realized they were outgunned and bolted, dragging their wounded with them. When the shooting stopped, Marcus was bleeding from his shoulder, but alive. "You okay, kid?" Marcus asked, breathing hard. "Yeah," Daryl said. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely form words. "That was good thinking. The chair. Quick." Marcus reloaded his gun with practiced efficiency. "This changes things. Someone doesn't want this deal to happen. Someone powerful enough to send a hit crew." "Does that mean we call it off?" Daryl asked. Marcus shook his head. "No. This means we're both in danger if we don't. That kind of opposition only happens when you're threatening someone's money." He looked at Daryl with new respect. "The deal's on. But understand, there's people in this city who want us at war. We're going to have to watch each other's backs now." They finalized the agreement right there in the basement, blood still fresh on the concrete, gunfire still echoing in their ears. It was no longer just a negotiation. It was an alliance born from shared enemies. The deal was struck that night. And over the next year, as Daryl moved into 18, something unexpected happened. He became someone people respected, not because he was the hardest or the fastest, but because he understood something fundamental. Power wasn't about taking. Power was about understanding what people needed and providing it. Scene 2. B. Malik's Scar. One evening, Daryl was alone with Malik in the back of the barber shop when he asked the question he'd been holding on to for years. "Why did you pick me?" Malik was cleaning his gun, an old 9mm with worn grips. He didn't look up. "Because you were smart," he said simply. "That's not a real answer." Malik set the gun down and looked at Daryl directly. "You're right, it's not." Malik rolled up his sleeve. On his forearm was a scar, long and white, running from wrist to elbow. Not a knife wound, though it looked like one. Something deeper. "I had a son," Malik said. "Name was Marcus. He was 17. Daryl didn't respond. He knew the past tense of what Malik was saying. He was smart too. Smarter than me, maybe. He wanted out. Wanted to go to college. Wanted to be something other than what I was. Malik rolled his sleeve back down. "But the thing about this life is, once you're in, staying out isn't as simple as making good grades. The neighborhood has other plans for smart kids." Malik lit a cigarette. "A crew tried to recruit him. I told him to come to me if anyone approached him. He didn't. He was trying to handle it himself, trying to be a man." Malik's voice didn't change, but something in it hardened. "They showed up at his school one afternoon, beat him, told him to deliver a message. His father should stop thinking he had authority, that kids were fair game now." "What happened?" Daryl asked, though he already knew. "He died," Malik said. "They gave him an overdose. Didn't kill him outright. Just forced it down his throat and let him figure out what to do with it. He ran to the hospital, got there just in time. The doctors said if he'd waited another hour, his heart would have stopped." Malik paused. But he was never the same. Something inside him broke. He started using on his own, trying to get that feeling back, like he was controlling it, like he wasn't just a victim. By the time he was 19, it didn't matter that he'd been clean from the forced dose. He'd made a home for himself in that addiction. Malik looked at Daryl. He overdosed at 22. Real this time. No hospital, no rescue. Just gone. Daryl understood now. Understood why Malik had noticed him in that alley. Why he'd given him the number. Why he'd brought him into the tide instead of letting him wash out on the streets. "I wanted to save him," Malik continued. "But I waited too long. I thought he'd come to me. I thought he'd ask for help. Instead, he died alone in an apartment 3 blocks from here." Malik ground out his cigarette. "So when I saw you fighting those Crimson Bloods kids, fighting smart, not angry, I thought maybe I could do it differently this time. Maybe I could get to you before this life broke you." "You did," Daryl said. "I'm trying," Malik corrected. "But the thing about trying to save people in this life is that you can't always win. You can draw lines. You can make rules. But the system is bigger than you. And sometimes, despite everything, the system wins anyway. Daryl thought about this. Thought about Jerome. Thought about the no drugs rule he'd made. Thought about how a rule was only as good as the enforcement behind it. "The scar," Daryl said. "How did you get it?" Malik looked at his forearm. "That was me," he said quietly. "After Marcus died, I couldn't figure out how to stay in this life and live with what I was. So I tried to leave. They didn't let me. We fought. I got the scar trying to run. Didn't make it far." Malik smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They told me if I ever left again, they'd make sure every person I'd ever saved got what my son got. So I stayed, and I tried to save people anyway." Daryl understood then the full weight of what Malik had been carrying all those years, the guilt and the responsibility, the knowledge that staying meant being complicit, but leaving meant condemning everyone around him. "I'm going to keep your rule," Daryl said. "The no drugs rule. I'm going to enforce it." "I know," Malik said. "That's why I brought you in. That's why I let you lead the younger kids. Because you have something I didn't at your age. You have clarity. You know what line you're drawing before the system forces you to draw it." Malik paused. "But I want you to know something. The system is always testing lines, always looking for the weakness. And sometimes when you draw a line too firmly, people try to erase it by erasing you." "I'm not afraid," Daryl said. "You should be," Malik replied. "Fear keeps you alive. Fear keeps you sharp. It's confidence that kills people in this life. Confidence that your rules matter. Confidence that your lines will hold." Malik looked directly at Daryl. "Don't be confident. Be careful. There's a difference." Scene 3. The cost. But every choice had a cost. It started with a kid named Jerome. 14 years old, good with numbers. Someone Daryl had personally brought into the tide because the kid needed work and Daryl needed someone he could trust to manage the numbers on the south side. Jerome was good at what he did. Quiet, meticulous, the kind of kid who paid attention to details. But he was also desperate to prove himself, desperate to be seen as more than just the kid managing numbers. One afternoon, Devin, still moving through the organization, still respected by some of the old heads, approached Jerome on the south side. "Hey, kid," Devin said, "you want to do something more?" Jerome looked up. "Like what?" "Help me move a package, important package." Malik's asking. It was a lie, but it was a lie that worked. The name Malik still meant authority. Jerome went to find Daryl, but Daryl was across town on a supply run. By the time Jerome couldn't find him, Devin had already pushed him toward the meeting point. One evening, Jerome came to Daryl with fear written across his face. "I need to talk to you," Jerome said. They went to a quiet spot behind the barber shop, the same spot where Daryl had learned so much from Devin years before. "One of the older guys," Jerome started, "he asked me to help move a package. Said it was from Malik. But Daryl, something went wrong." "What do you mean wrong?" Daryl asked. "I delivered it like he asked. But the guy who took the package, he wasn't the person I was supposed to give it to. He grabbed my arm and he said I had to taste it first, to make sure it was good." Jerome's hands were shaking. "He forced my mouth open, Daryl. He made me swallow it. Then he took the package and left. I didn't understand what was happening until my body started changing. The nausea, the sweating." Jerome looked up at him, panic in his eyes. "He poisoned me, Daryl. And the guy who set it up, the one who asked me to deliver it in the first place, it was Devin." Daryl understood the trap immediately. Devin had set it up perfectly, knowing Jerome would come to Daryl, knowing Daryl would want to redirect the delivery, and having already placed a runner who would force the drugs down Jerome's throat instead. This wasn't about the package. This was about showing Daryl that his rules didn't matter, that even his most carefully protected people could be broken. "Okay," Daryl said quietly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to come with me to the hospital. We're going to get you checked out. And then we're going to figure out how Devin thought he could get away with this." They went to the hospital immediately. The doctors confirmed what Jerome had suspected: forced ingestion of a fentanyl-laced product. His body went into overdose protocol, saved only by the speed of his arrival. Daryl sat next to Jerome's hospital bed as the kid lay sedated, machines monitoring his heart. Jerome's mother was in the hallway, crying. A doctor pulled Daryl aside and said words like cardiac arrest and another 20 minutes. When Jerome could finally stay awake, Daryl was there. "I'm sorry," Jerome whispered. "Don't apologize," Daryl said. "This wasn't your fault. This was Devin. This was him testing whether my rules meant anything." "Do they?" Jerome asked. Daryl didn't answer for a long time. "They mean something," he finally said. "Not enough, apparently, but something." Daryl squeezed Jerome's hand. "You're going to get through this, and when you do, things are going to change." But there was something else Daryl needed to understand. Over the next 3 days, while Jerome recovered, Daryl started asking questions. Not who had forced Jerome into the delivery. He already knew that. The question was why Devin thought he could get away with it. And what he discovered changed everything. Devin hadn't acted alone. He'd been talking to people inside the Tide for months, building alliances, testing who was loyal to Daryl and who might be convinced that Daryl's principles were making the organization weak. The overdose wasn't random. It was strategic. It was Devin trying to prove that Daryl's no drugs rule was a liability, that by protecting kids like Jerome, Daryl was making them targets instead of protecting them. Daryl confronted him in the back of Malik's barber shop, away from witnesses. "Jerome almost died," Daryl said quietly. Devin didn't deny it. "Kid needed a test. We all get tested." "You didn't test him. You tried to kill him." "That's how the organization works," Devin said. "You know this. You make sure people have something to lose. Once they do, they're loyal." "Not like that," Daryl said. "Do you think for a second that I don't understand that this was you moving against me?" Devin smiled, a smile without warmth. "You're getting weak, and when leaders get weak, people start moving against them. I've already been talking to some of the guys. They're interested in what I have to say." Daryl understood then. Devin wasn't just explaining his actions. He was telling Daryl he was dangerous, that there was a faction within the Tide that didn't respect Daryl's principles, that if Daryl kept pushing the line, people would push back. "If you go against me on this," Daryl said, "you're done. You leave the Tide, or you don't make it out of this neighborhood alive. Those are your choices." Devin laughed. "You don't have the stomach to make that stick, kid." But he left anyway, took a payout, moved to Jersey, started working with a crew down there. It was the first real power move Daryl had to make, and it cost him, not in money, but in certainty, because now he knew there were people inside the Tide who resented his leadership, people who would move against him if they thought they could win. Scene 3B, Malik's discovery. Malik found out before Daryl could tell him. One of the other guys mentioned it in passing. Devin was getting a payout, leaving the organization, moving to Jersey. Malik pulled Daryl aside the same day. "Is it true Devin's leaving?" "Yeah," Daryl said. "I told him to." Malik's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Tell me what happened." Daryl explained. Jerome, the cut product, the overdose, Devin's admission that it was deliberate, Devin's threat about a faction inside the Tide. When Daryl finished, Malik was quiet for a long time. "That was good," Malik finally said. "Pushing him out, that was necessary." But nothing." Malik lit a cigarette. "I just want you to know something. Devin came to me years ago, right after I brought you in. He told me I was wasting my time with you. Said you'd never have what it took to lead, that I was trying to create a conscience in an organization that didn't have room for one." Daryl felt something tighten in his chest. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Devin was testing you every step of the way. The mentorship when you were 14, that was a test. He wanted to see if he could push you toward the hard drugs himself. And when you rejected it, when you didn't take even a recreational hit despite his encouragement, he decided you were going to be a problem." Malik leaned closer. "Devin had ambitions. He thought the no drugs rule was soft. He thought I was going soft. He started building an alternative power structure inside the Tide, positioning himself as someone who'd be willing to take harder lines. And when you became the one enforcing the rule, became the one refusing fentanyl, he saw his opportunity. To what? To prove that your rules don't work, that compassion is weakness, that the only way to hold power in this life is through fear and control." Malik took a drag. "He tried to break Jerome to break you. If Jerome had taken the cut product, if it had worked, Devin would have told people, Daryl's rules don't protect them. They don't even save them. All they do is make people vulnerable. But it backfired, Daryl said. It backfired because you're smarter than Devin gave you credit for. You kept Jerome alive by staying 3 steps ahead. Malik looked at Daryl. And now Devin's gone. But that's not the end of this. There are more people like Devin inside the Tide. People who resent your principles. People who think profit matters more than people. So what do I do? You keep drawing lines, Malik said simply. You keep making it clear that there are costs for crossing them. And you accept that some people won't understand. Some people won't respect it. And some people eventually will try to kill you for it. Daryl thought about this. That's a grim way to put it, he said. It's the truth, Malik replied. Devin wasn't the first person to try to erase your rules. He won't be the last. Scene 4. The Brother Who Never Leaves. Seven showed up at the basketball court on a Saturday in late summer, the August heat sitting heavy on everything. Daryl hadn't seen him in almost 2 years, not since they'd moved to the east side. Yo, Daryl! Seven's voice had changed, deeper, more sure. He was 16 now, with something in his eyes that Daryl recognized as pain, though he didn't know why it was there yet. Seven. They fell into a hug that was part greeting, part reassurance that they were still connected despite everything. They played basketball for an hour, not saying much, just existing together in a way that felt like it mattered. When they sat down on the bench, sweat cooling on their skin, Seven asked, "You good?" Daryl wanted to tell him everything. He wanted to tell him about the Tide, about the negotiations, about Jerome, about the weight of choices. Instead, he said, "I'm managing. You?" "Yeah." Seven paused. "Something's happening to me, Daryl. Something I don't understand." Daryl felt his protective instinct rise. What kind of something? "It feels like anxiety, I guess." Seven struggled for words. "Sometimes I get really shaky and nervous. Sometimes it's triggered by noise. Sometimes it's when I'm stressed. And for the longest time, I've been waking up in the middle of the night from dreams I can't remember." He paused. "But now when I wake up, it's different. The world slows down. Sounds are amplified, distorted. I can almost feel the sound like it has weight." Daryl nodded. "Sounds like anxiety. You might need to find ways to calm yourself when it happens." "Well, music seems to help," Seven said. "I even feel the music more intensely, which is actually a good thing." But what?" Daryl asked. "I don't know. It's like the music connects to something in me that nothing else does. Like I'm tuned into a frequency the rest of the world can't hear." Daryl thought for a moment. "Maybe you've got one of those things geniuses have. Some kind of heightened sensitivity." "Maybe," Seven said, considering it. "I'm going to focus on the positive. It's like when I listen to music, or when I feel rhythm, everything becomes clear, like I'm tuned into something the rest of the world isn't." Seven looked at him. "You ever feel like that?" Daryl thought about the night his father died. He thought about the moment with Marcus in the basement. "Yeah," he said. "I know exactly what you mean." They didn't talk about it more than that, but in that moment, Daryl understood that his little cousin was becoming someone special, and he understood that he had to make sure nothing happened to Seven. Whatever path Daryl was on, Seven couldn't follow. Not the same way. Scene 5. Crimson Blood. By 18, Daryl had negotiated 3 separate territorial disputes, prevented a war between the Tide and the Blue Runners, and established himself as Bishop's right hand. But the Crimson Bloods didn't care about any of that. They were newer, hungrier, and they wanted everything the Tide had. They didn't believe in negotiation. They believed in force. The first sign was a shipment interrupted, then a corner taken, then one of Daryl's people, a girl named Shonda who managed the west side, found a message painted on a wall in red. "This is ours now." Bishop's response was immediate. "We move on them. We move hard." But Daryl saw something Bishop didn't. The Crimson Bloods were goading them into a war they couldn't win quickly. This was going to be messy. This was going to get people killed. "Give me a week," Daryl said. "For what?" "To talk to them. To understand what they actually want. Maybe there's a middle ground." Bishop shook his head. There's no middle ground with these people. Then we find one anyway, Daryl said. 1 week. If it doesn't work, we do it your way. Bishop gave him the week. Daryl reached out through a contact, a woman named Carmen who ran an after-school program and somehow knew everyone in the city. Through her, he got a meeting with the Crimson Blood's leader, a man called Knife. Neutral territory, old restaurant, 2 bodyguards Knife had promised. When Daryl arrived, there were 8 armed men waiting instead. Insurance, Knife said when he saw Daryl's expression. You come to my territory, talk about splitting what I want. I want to know you're serious about the deal. Daryl had walked into a room where he was outnumbered 8-1. A single decision from Knife would end with his body in the river. Everything in his training told him to fight, to run. But Daryl recognized this for what it was, a test. Knife needed to know if Daryl was scared, and if he was scared, whether he'd still be useful. Daryl sat down across from Knife and began to talk. Slowly, methodically. He laid out the map. The Tide territory was large but sprawling. There were spaces, profitable spaces, where the Tide barely operated. Spaces where the Crimson Bloods could build something without direct conflict. He presented it not as a desperate plea, but as a business proposal, as something that benefited Knife more than it benefited the Tide. What's yours is what you can hold, Daryl said, and you can't hold everything, but you can hold something that matters. As he talked, he watched Knife's face, watched the respect forming in the older man's eyes, the understanding that this kid wasn't stupid enough to panic, wasn't arrogant enough to think he could fight 8 trained soldiers, was in other words exactly the kind of person you could make a deal with. Knife listened to the entire proposition, then said, You ever consider working for me? Daryl smiled slightly. I like where I am. Fair enough. Knife extended his hand. We have a deal. That deal held. The Crimson Bloods moved into their new territories. The Tide consolidated what they had. And Daryl, at 18 years old, had prevented a war. Scene 5B, home. Daryl's mother was making dinner when he came through the door. She heard him before she saw him. The way he moved through the apartment now, like he was carrying something heavy he'd learned not to set down. Daryl! She turned from the stove, a wooden spoon in her hand. She was wearing an apron with a faded sunflower pattern. She'd been wearing the same apron for 2 years. Hi, Mom. Sit, eat. She set a plate in front of him. Rice, beans, chicken. Simple food, but made with care. You're thin. You're doing too much. I'm fine. You're not fine. She sat down across from him at the small kitchen table, the same table where his father used to sit, where his mother used to worry about money. Now she didn't have to worry about money. She just had to worry about him. How much of this are you involved in, Daryl? How deep? Daryl didn't answer immediately. He cut into the chicken. Deep enough, he finally said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. His mother looked at him for a long time. She'd watched him grow up in this neighborhood. She'd watched him change from a scared 13-year-old into something else, something harder, something that carried weight. I lost your father, she said quietly, to this life, to choices he made, to violence he was involved with. I watched it destroy him. I watched it destroy us. She paused. And now I'm watching my son walk the same path, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Daryl set his fork down. I'm not him, Daryl said. I'm not going to die on a street corner. You don't know that. I know that I'm being careful. I know that I'm trying to build something different, something that isn't just about violence and turf. Daryl. His mother reached across the table and took his hand. The system doesn't care about your differences. The system doesn't care about your principles. It will use you up. It will take everything you're trying to build and burn it. And when you're no longer useful, it will discard you. Then I'll be discarded, Daryl said. But at least I'll know I tried to do it right. His mother squeezed his hand. Seven called me, she said. He's worried about you. Seven doesn't need to worry about me. He's your cousin, and he loves you. Of course he worries about you. His mother let go of his hand. And I worry about you. Not because I think you're going to fail, but because I think you're going to succeed. I think you're going to become exactly what they want you to be. A leader, someone with power, someone they can rely on. And I think when you've built that up, when you've spent all your energy building something, someone is going to come along and try to take it from you. Daryl didn't respond. Promise me something, his mother continued. What? Promise me that if this ever becomes too much, if this ever costs you everything, you'll find a way out. I don't care if you have to run. I don't care if you have to disappear. Just promise me you'll try to survive. Daryl thought about this, thought about his father, thought about Jerome, thought about Devin, thought about the lines he'd drawn and the people who wanted to erase them. I promise, he said. They sat in silence for a while, just existing together in the kitchen. Outside, the neighborhood moved. People lived their lives. Money changed hands. Turf was fought over. Power shifted. But in the kitchen, in that small space, there was just a mother and her son, and the weight of all the things they couldn't say to each other. Act 3. The Wait, ages 19 to 20. Scene 1. The Succession. 19 was the year Bishop decided it was time to leave. But he didn't decide it alone. He came to Daryl late one evening, after the streets had quieted down, in a car parked on an empty block in Prospect Heights. Just the two of them, no one else. There's something I need you to understand first, Bishop said without preamble, before I tell you what I'm about to tell you. Daryl waited. The tide is under pressure, Bishop continued. Not from crews, from outside. There are people who want to move product through this territory. Fentanyl, real quantities, the kind that transforms a neighborhood into a graveyard. Bishop lit a cigarette. And there are people inside our organization who think that's a good business move. Devin, Daryl said. Devin and others. People you don't know about yet. People who've been patient, waiting for the right moment. Bishop turned to face him. 3 weeks ago, someone approached me, offered me money, serious money, to step back, to let someone else take control of the tide, someone more flexible about the fentanyl trade. You turned them down. I did. But the fact that they approached me means they're planning next moves, which is why I'm telling you this now. Bishop paused. I'm getting out, but not because I'm tired, because the organization is going to need someone at the helm who can't be bought. Someone who has principles that aren't for sale. Someone who understands that this neighborhood, these people, matter more than money. Daryl felt something settle into place. This wasn't random. This was strategy. That's you, Bishop said. The organization knows it. Malik knows it. The old heads know it. And the people who want to move fentanyl through here, they know it too, which is why they're going to come for you. Come for me how? I don't know yet, but they'll try to isolate you. They'll try to corrupt people around you. They'll try to prove that your principles are weak. And if that doesn't work, Bishop didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. So if I take leadership, you're putting yourself in direct opposition to people with money and reach? Real reach. Bishop looked Daryl directly in the eyes. I need you to understand that before you say yes. This isn't just street politics anymore. This is about something bigger. Daryl thought about his father. He thought about Jerome. He thought about the line he'd drawn at fentanyl and what it might cost. I'll do it, Daryl said. Bishop nodded. Good, because I'm going to Florida tomorrow, and I'm going to tell everyone who matters that you're the choice, that this is my decision, that anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me before I leave. Bishop let Daryl out of the car at a neutral location, a 24-hour diner on the edge of territory. As Daryl walked toward the door, Bishop called after him. Daryl! He turned back. Watch Malik and protect your cousin. There are people who'll use them to get to you. Bishop paused. You keep your line, even if it costs you everything. I will. I know, Bishop said. That's why I'm trusting you with this. Bishop drove away into the night. Daryl watched the car disappear, then went into the diner and ordered coffee he didn't want, sitting alone in a booth, understanding that his life had just fundamentally changed. Scene 2. The Erasure. Bishop never made it to Florida. He was found 2 days later in a parking garage in Sunset Park, shot twice in the head, execution style. No witnesses, no leads. Just a body in the void it left behind. The official story was that Bishop had been dealt with by a rival crew, maybe the Crimson Bloods, maybe someone from out of state. The kind of thing that happened in this life, where powerful people made powerful enemies. But Daryl knew better. He knew because within 6 hours of Bishop's death, Devon walked back into Tide territory like he'd never left. And with him came a crew, soldiers brought in from Jersey, from downstate, from places beyond the neighborhood. Hard men, organized men, men with military discipline, and they started moving through the organization, consolidating power. Malik was the first to call Daryl. "They're saying Devon's taking over," Malik said over the phone, his voice tight. "Saying Bishop left him authority before he left, that it was supposed to happen." "That's a lie," Daryl said. "Of course it's a lie, but lies don't matter if enough people repeat them." Malik paused. "Daryl, you need to understand something. This isn't a move from Devon. This is bigger than Devon. He's got backing, real backing. I don't know who yet, but nobody coordinates this kind of operation on their own." Daryl was already moving through the city, trying to reach people, trying to understand the scope of what was happening. What he found was dissolution. The people who'd been loyal to him, who'd fought beside him, who'd respected his principles, they were either disappearing or pivoting. Some left the Tide entirely. Some threw in with Devon, calculating that the wind was shifting, and some were being actively removed. Shonda, who'd managed the West Side, was found beaten nearly to death in an alley. She survived, but the message was clear. Loyalty to Daryl got you hurt. Marcus, the Blue Runners leader who'd become an ally, was assassinated in his own neighborhood. A message to the other crews: if you stand with Daryl, this is what happens. Within 48 hours, Devon had effectively purged half of Daryl's support structure. Scene 3, underground. Daryl understood that staying visible meant dying. He went to ground in a safe house that Malik had maintained for years. A basement apartment in a building that didn't officially exist on any records, owned through shell companies within shell companies. It was a 6x8 concrete room with a single window, high and barred, that let in pale light from the street above. A cot, a chemical toilet, a water tank. Enough supplies for a month. Malik came that first night. "They're saying you ran," Malik said, sitting on the edge of the cot. "Saying you got scared when Devon came back with his people. That you abandoned the organization." "Let them say it," Daryl said. "They're right. I did run. Running is surviving." "There's people who want to stand with you," Malik continued. "The old heads. People who understood what Bishop was trying to do. But they need to know. Are you actually going to fight, or are you going to hide in a basement?" "I don't know yet," Daryl said honestly. "I need to understand what happened. I need to know why Bishop got killed. I need to know who's behind Devon." "I've been working on that," Malik said. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, the kind of thing that could get both of them killed if found. "There's a development company, Consolidated Real Estate Holdings. They've been buying property in this neighborhood for 3 years. Storefronts, apartment buildings, commercial spaces. They've got a plan." "What plan?" "Gentrification, but not the slow kind, the fast kind. They want this neighborhood destabilized. They want property values to crater. They want people desperate enough to sell, and they need the neighborhood to be a hellscape first. Overrun with drugs, gang violence, poverty spiraling. That's when people leave. That's when property becomes cheap." Malik lit a cigarette. "Fentanyl is the accelerant. Get enough fentanyl on these streets, you create an epidemic. That epidemic drives down property values. That epidemic makes people want to escape. And when they escape, the developers swoop in and buy everything for pennies. Who's behind the developers?" "That's the harder part, but there's a name that keeps coming up. Vincent Marcella." Daryl's blood went cold. "Marcella runs operations for the Genovese family," Malik continued. "East Coast mob. He's been expanding into real estate as a money-cleaning operation, and he's decided that this neighborhood is a perfect project. Empty it, stabilize it, rebuild it, sell it off at premium prices to tech companies and luxury developers. Make billions, all legal on the surface. And Devon? Devon's probably on someone's payroll. Maybe Marcella's directly. Maybe through intermediaries. The Crimson Bloods. That's Marcella's street crew for this operation. Knife works for him. And Devon was sent in to take over the Tide, make sure we cooperate with the fentanyl pipeline, or die trying." Daryl stood up, moving to the window. Through it, he could see the edge of the street, the bottom halves of passing people. Bishop found out, Daryl said quietly. That's why he decided to step down. That's why he put me in position. He knew what was coming. I think so, Malik said. And I think he also knew that once he left, they'd move on him because he knew too much. So they killed him before the succession could be finalized, before I could be formally announced. So there'd be chaos. So there'd be a power vacuum for Devin to fill. Daryl understood the strategy now. They needed me isolated. And now they're trying to find you, Malik said. Devin's got soldiers checking safe houses, reaching out to people who know you. It's only a matter of time before someone breaks, gives up a location. Then we don't have much time, Daryl said. We need to move. Move where? You can't go home. Your mother's being watched. Seven's got protection, but it's fragile. Anywhere you show up, you bring violence. Not move me, Daryl said. Move everyone else. Scene 4, the counter. Over the next week, Malik and a small network of the old heads, people who'd been with the tide before Devin, who understood what Bishop had been building, began organizing. They couldn't match Devin's soldiers directly, but they didn't need to. What they had was knowledge of the neighborhood, relationships built over years, and people desperate enough to fight because they understood what gentrification meant. Malik sent word through underground channels that Daryl was alive, that he was planning a counter, that people who cared about the future of the neighborhood should get ready to move. A pastor at St. Mary's, a local community center, an underground radio station, they all began spreading word. The message was simple. The tide was being taken over by people working for outside interests. The neighborhood was being targeted for destruction, and there was someone ready to fight back. Daryl emerged from the basement for the first time in 10 days. The meeting was held in the basement of St. Mary's, in a space beneath the church where people had been meeting in secret for decades. 23 people showed up, some gang-affiliated, some not. Aunts and uncles who'd lost kids to overdoses, community workers, teachers, a few cops from the precinct who understood which way the wind was blowing. Daryl stood at the head of a table and laid out what he'd learned. The developers, the mob connection, Devin's role in the conspiracy, Bishop's assassination. This is bigger than street politics, Daryl said. This is about whether this neighborhood survives or gets hollowed out and sold to the highest bidder. And it's being orchestrated by people who don't care about any of us, who see us as obstacles to be removed. So what do we do? A woman asked. Tamara, who ran a harm reduction clinic. We make it impossible for them to operate, Daryl said. We cut off the fentanyl supply. We expose the consolidated real estate scheme. We make it clear that this neighborhood isn't for sale, not to developers, not to the mob. And if they kill you? Malik asked. Then someone else takes over, Daryl said simply. But they have to understand, killing me doesn't solve their problem because the neighborhood is awake now, and people who are awake don't go quietly. Scene 5, the confrontation. Devin moved first. He came to the church the next morning with 10 soldiers, surrounded it, demanded that Daryl come out. Daryl stepped outside into the gray morning light. You're making a mistake, Devin said, casually smoking a cigarette. Standing here, you've got people inside that church, and they're about to become a problem. Then solve it, Daryl said. Tell me why Bishop had to die. Devin smiled. Because Bishop had a conscience, and consciences are liabilities in this business. And you don't have one? I have one. I just sold it to someone who pays better than the tide ever could. Devin flicked ash. Marcella's offering me $50,000 a month to run operations here. $50,000. That's more than I'd make running the tide for a decade. So yeah, I'm going to take it. And if you want to keep breathing, you'll take Marcella's money too and do what he says. And what's he say? Stay out of his way. Let the fentanyl move. Watch the neighborhood get destroyed and keep your mouth shut. Devin stepped closer. Or I kill you. I kill your family. I kill every person in that church. And then I take over the tide for real, and we all get rich off the gentrification. Daryl understood then that there was no negotiating with Devin. Devin had already made his choice, already crossed the line Daryl had drawn all those years ago. There's just one problem, Daryl said quietly. What's that? You're the only person between me and Marcella." Before Devin could react, gunfire erupted from the windows of the church. Malik and the old heads had been ready, weapons positioned, waiting for the moment Devin revealed himself. Devin's 10 soldiers scattered, some returning fire, some trying to flee. Devin pulled his gun, but Daryl was already moving. 7 years of survival instinct, of reading rooms, of understanding violence in his bones. It all crystallized into a single moment. Devin didn't hesitate. He fired at Daryl, the shot going wide as Daryl dove left. But there was nowhere to hide. Not from this. Not from the choice Devin had made. Daryl moved without thinking. One motion, one bullet. Devin went down on the church steps, blood spreading across the concrete. It was over in 3 seconds. Daryl stood over Devin's body, his gun still raised, his breathing hard. "It's done," Malik said, emerging from the church. "Now we move." They left Devin there for the Crimson Bloods to find. A message of their own. This is what happens when you betray the code. But before they disappeared, Malik made one move. He gave copies of everything: the financial documents, the property records, the connections to Consolidated Real Estate Holdings and the Genovese family, to Tamara at the Harm Reduction Clinic. He gave copies to the pastor at St. Mary's. He gave copies to a journalist from the local independent paper who'd been trying to expose gentrification schemes for years. Daryl kept his hands clean. No FBI contact, no cooperation, no snitching. But the information was out there now, in community hands, ready to be weaponized through channels that couldn't be traced back to him. The story was about to go public, and that would matter. Scene 6, The Reckoning. Within 3 days, the story was everywhere. The independent journalist published a 40-page investigation, Gentrification as a Weapon, How Mob-Backed Developers Use Fentanyl to Hollow Out Communities. It laid out everything: the property purchases, the fentanyl pipeline, the connection between Consolidated Real Estate Holdings and the Genovese family, Vincent Marcella's role, the assassination of Bishop. It went viral. Community groups picked it up. Activists amplified it. Local politicians, who'd been looking the other way, suddenly started calling for investigations. The police were forced to move. Federal authorities, who'd been investigating Marcella for years but lacked ammunition, now had what they needed. They froze some of Consolidated Real Estate's accounts. They began inquiries. They arrested Marcella's lieutenant, though Marcella himself disappeared before they could move. But the Genovese family doesn't forgive exposure. They don't forgive someone making noise that disrupts their operations, even indirectly. Knife, still functional on the streets, was given one order: make an example. Show that the neighborhood can't rebel without consequence. It came in the form of an ambush outside Malik's apartment. Daryl was there, working through the aftermath, when the shooters came. Professional. Multiple positions. A coordinated hit. Malik was shot first, a bullet through the window, taking him in the shoulder. He went down hard. Daryl returned fire, covering Malik, getting him inside as more bullets shattered glass and splintered wood. But there were too many shooters, and Daryl knew they were going to be overwhelmed. That's when gunfire erupted from inside the apartment and from the surrounding buildings. Malik's old heads had been positioned there for days, a rotating watch, knowing this moment would come. Return fire from multiple angles turned the tide. The professional shooters caught in crossfire retreated. When the dust settled, all 3 attackers were down. Daryl worked to stop Malik's bleeding while the old heads secured the perimeter. "We need to move," one of them said. "They know where we are now." "Get him to the hospital," Daryl said. "Tell them it was an accident. Tell them whatever you need to." Malik was loaded into a car. The old heads dispersed, already planning the next move. Daryl stood alone in the apartment, surrounded by broken glass and the smell of gunfire. This was it, the moment where everything collapsed. The moment where hiding wasn't enough. He had maybe an hour before the shooters reported back. Maybe an hour before another wave came. Scene 7, The Roof. He found his way to the roof of the building, the same place where years ago he'd first understood what power meant, where he'd learned that choosing to protect people meant choosing to be hunted. From here, he could see the whole neighborhood: the east side where he'd spent the last 7 years, the uptown neighborhood where he'd come from, the street lights coming on as evening descended, the city vast and indifferent to the struggles of people inside it. Seven was waiting for him there. Daryl didn't ask how Seven knew. He learned long ago not to question how his cousin moved through the world, how he seemed to know things before they happened. "You shouldn't be here," Daryl said. "Neither should you," Seven said simply. "But here we are." "They're going to come back," Seven said. "Until you're dead, or they're dead, this doesn't end." "I know," Daryl said. "So what are you going to do?" Daryl thought about his father, dead for nothing. He thought about Jerome, poisoned and left to OD. He thought about Marcus, killed for being an ally. He thought about Bishop, assassinated before he could even leave office. He thought about Malik, bleeding in an apartment. He thought about his mother, terrified every time her phone rang. "I'm going to disappear," Daryl said finally. "I'm going to leave this neighborhood, leave this city. I'm going to find somewhere I can be nobody, and I'm going to try to live." "You're running," Seven said. "I'm surviving," Daryl said. "Like my father never did. Like I learned in those streets. You run when you can't win. And I can't win against the Genovese family. All I can do is stay alive." Seven looked out at the city. "I'm coming with you," he said. "No. You have things here. You have music. You have a life." "I have you," Seven said simply. "And if you're gone, there's no life here worth staying for." Daryl put his arm around his cousin. "We're going to make it, both of us, because that's what we do. We survive." That night, Daryl left the East Side, left the Tide, left the neighborhood that had defined him for 7 years. But before he left, he had one more conversation. Scene 8. The Mother. They met in a diner on the edge of territory. His mother was older than he remembered, worn down by worry and grief. "I'm leaving," he told her. She nodded like she'd been expecting this. "Take your money," she said. "I don't want it. You're going to need it more than I do." "Mom, I lost your father to this life. I'm not going to lose you too." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You tried to do the right thing. You tried to build something different. But the system doesn't care about different. The system wants compliance. And when you don't comply, the system breaks you." "I know," Daryl said. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for trying, for keeping your principles, for being someone who could look himself in the mirror. That's rare." "It didn't change anything," Daryl said. "The neighborhood is still going to be destroyed. Fentanyl is still going to poison people. Marcella might be arrested, but the system that created him is still there." "No," his mother said. "You change things. Not everything. But you change things. You made people aware. You made the story public. You disrupted their plans enough that they had to arrest people, that they had to pause. That matters." They sat in silence for a long time, just holding hands across a formica table in a dying diner in a neighborhood that was already beginning to gentrify, already beginning to erase itself. When Daryl left, he kissed his mother on the forehead and walked out into the night. Seven was waiting in a car. They drove north toward the interstate, toward somewhere else. Scene 9, Reflection. 1 year later, Daryl was somewhere upstate, working in a warehouse, living under a different name. He didn't make much money, enough to live, enough to help Seven get by, enough to send money back to his mother. He'd learned to live without power, to live without status, to live without the weight of leadership. But he also couldn't stop seeing it. The neighborhood reduced, the tide being slowly swallowed by outside interest. The fentanyl still flowing, though slower now. The gentrification beginning its relentless march. Devin was dead. The man who'd betrayed Jerome, who'd conspired with the Genovese family, who'd tried to destroy everything Daryl had built. He'd bled out on the church steps and never saw another day. Marcella's organization was fractured, though it was already rebuilding. Knife was dead, killed by a rival crew 2 months after Daryl left. Bishop never got his retirement, but Malik survived. He'd survived 7 years of gang violence, and he survived the Genovese family. He'd stepped back from leadership of the Tide, letting someone new take over. Someone younger, someone with different principles than Daryl, but still someone who refused the fentanyl trade. And Seven was finding his own path, discovering challenges that transcended the neighborhood's boundaries. They still communicated over the phone every chance they got. Daryl didn't fully understand what he'd accomplished until years later. The line he'd drawn, the refusal to let fentanyl poison his neighborhood, would echo forward in ways he couldn't have predicted. The story he'd made public inspired others to fight the same fight in different neighborhoods. Daryl became a legend, whispered about in communities from the East Side to places he'd never been. But most importantly, he was a legend in the mind of Seven. Seven who carried something Daryl didn't understand. Seven whose sensitivity to rhythm and sound and the invisible frequencies of the world pointed towards something far larger than either of them yet knew. Seven who would one day realize that the conviction Daryl had demonstrated, the willingness to stand against corruption, to refuse easy compromises, to fight for something beyond survival, that conviction was a gift, a blueprint, something that, when amplified by the power awakening within him, would allow him to fight battles on a scale neither cousin could yet comprehend. Daryl had taught Seven that some things are more important than survival. That principle would become the foundation of everything Seven was meant to become. On the other side of the city, in a room where the walls seemed to hum with potential, Seven slept, but not peacefully. His body trembled with energy that had nowhere to go. The ambient sound of the world, the wind, the distant hum of the city, the pulse of traffic blocks away, all of it synchronized to the rhythm of his heartbeat. He was tuned to frequencies the rest of the world couldn't hear. In the depths of his mind, a chaotic vortex spun, not destructive, but waiting, building. The seven-shaped birthmark on his head flickered with blue light, subtle but unmistakable. The first signs of a power gathering itself, like a quasar gathering light before the explosion. He tossed and turned, caught between sleep and the edge of something vast. His dreams were full of sound made visible, of patterns and rhythms that held meaning just beyond his conscious reach. He was waiting, not knowing he was waiting, not knowing that the emotional catalyst, his cousin's sacrifice, his cousin's refusal to break, his cousin's belief in something greater than themselves, was the match. The power within him had been dormant, patient, eternal, but it was ready. It was waiting for the moment when duty would call, when the cosmic stakes would demand everything he was and everything he could become. For now he slept, and as he slept, his frequency grew stronger, his light grew brighter, and when he finally woke, truly woke, the foundations of the cosmos would tremble. The end of audiobook.